We are very excited to have two guests with us today is going to lead this informal yet insightful conversation, headset hot topics impacting change through storytelling. So please welcome Ricardo Martinez from Within the Trenches Media and Sarah Weston from the 911 Wonder Women. I always have a hard time saying that, Sarah.
You got it. Everybody does. It's fine.
Thanks, you guys, for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for having us. So excited.
Well, if you don't mind, if you just want to do a quick introduction, I think everyone probably in the room know who you are, but just for the sake of maybe not, or just, what's going on with you at the first of the year. Anything that you'd like to share is great.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, geez.
Ladies first.
Hi, I'm Sarah Weston. I'm the founder and executive director of 911 Wonder Women. We are a nonprofit organization whose mission is to provide tools and resources for women in 911. So this year is a big year for us. It's actually our second year in existence. So we spent the last year kind of fundraising and coming up with programs that would be useful for 911 as a whole. So we have a lot coming up this month. Even in January, we just yesterday announced the Fireworks Scholarship, which provides a scholarship for a woman in 911 to attend the dispatcher leadership training from the 360 dispatcher. We have a mentorship platform that we're launching. We have an empowered panel series. So lots going on in January. So stay tuned. Follow me.
Awesome. Well, my name is Ricardo Martinez, and let me turn my phone off here as my brother's trying to call me. There's always something, right? Something always happens. So I put my phone off there right now. So my name is Ricardo Martinez, and I'm the CEO and founder of Within the Trenches Media. This is a media company that's really caters towards public safety, and it's also based around a podcast that I created called Within the Trenches Podcast, which is true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them. And I have dispatchers come on and they share their stories, their experience, what it was like for them in the beginning, and just everything that they've done throughout, good calls, bad calls, funny calls, all types of things. I'm also the creator of Imagine Listening, which is a peer support type session that I do in different conferences, whether it be national or state conferences. And I also do virtual events like Dare to Be Great or Be the Difference, which is a virtual event that is coming up from the Denise Amberly Foundation. Before that, I was an industry partner, but also I was a dispatcher and supervisor for 13 and a half years. I started out in Florida and then finished off at the county that I grew up in. So Allegan County Central Dispatch is where I finished off my career. So it's been really good, and a lot of it has been done through the power of storytelling. So this is awesome to be here with all of you, and to be here with Sarah, and the honor to have Virtual Academy have us here to talk about how to impact change through storytelling. So let's start this, Sarah. Let's start with a little bit about that power of storytelling, and really, I guess, just kind of talk about, some of the things that you've gone through generally, with the different experiences the past couple of years.
Yes, for sure. So I actually have never been a dispatcher. I started in 911, working with 911 technology, and I've been a consultant for Next Gen 911 technology for about 16 years. And much of that was spent going into 911 centers and sitting along with you and figuring out how technology could help you do your job. But along with that, I got to know many telecommunicators and got to hear your stories just in a very informal way, just through discussion and conversation. And that has brought me to where I am today, more so than technology. Really, it's been the people and the stories who have changed me and changed my life and inspired me to go into this work in serving the 911 community. So storytelling is so important, and we all have this story that we kind of tell ourselves, right? Like what we're capable of, what we think we can do, what our lives are like. And it's important to hear other people's stories and kind of get out of our heads and listen to different experiences that people have had. And also, when you hear someone else's story, a lot of times you can relate to them and you can kind of get out of your own mind and get out of whatever inner voice is telling you that you're stuck, and be inspired and say, hey, I can relate to that. If this person can get in there and overcome and achieve, then I can too. So it's important, one of the things that I really wanted to talk about today is that everyone has a story. And I know, earlier in my career, I'd be like, whatever, it's boring. Like, I was born and raised in Ohio. Like, I played softball, but it's not bad. It's, it's the story of your life is so unique and so valuable for others to hear. And, I really encourage you, through whatever means, to think about your story, to tell it, to have that conversation with people. If you think about it, how popular are like biographies and documentary movies and biopics? It's because we as humans want to hear other stories. We want to see people succeed. We want to see people overcome challenges. Like, we all are overcoming challenges. So you never know who you're going to reach with your story. You never know. Just talking about your challenge, like, I'm really struggling with this. We have seen that in the 911 Wonder Woman Facebook group all the time. People will post, hey, I'm struggling with this. And then you'll get 15 comments of how different ways that people have overcome the same struggle. And it's so valuable. So that's kind of my kickoff as to the value of storytelling in my own life.
I think that's one of the things that between you and I, and to kind of build on what you were mentioning there, is everyone who is watching right now, keep that in mind, in the back of your mind, as you're listening to us tell all these different stories and how stuff has worked for us and how you can impact change. Think about your own story, your own dispatch story, your public safety story. How did you get into it in the beginning? What was it like for you? What were some of the struggles that you had? Because a lot of the stuff that you end up thinking about, especially now, is when it'll help you later on, especially when there's someone new who's coming in. Because a lot of times in dispatch, at least for me, you start going through, answering calls, doing all this other stuff, and you forget what it was like in the beginning. So then when someone comes on, sometimes, and I know it's happened, some people don't want to admit it, but sometimes in the beginning, you're thinking, why aren't they getting that? Or how come this? Or how come that? But you forget that in the beginning, you were right there as well. So think about all of this in the back of your minds, again, as we're talking, your story, what it was like, because later on, it might be a good trigger, though, in a sense that when you're back in dispatch and you're talking to someone, you will end up sharing a story and not know that you're impacting someone, because we don't always know. We don't always know the type of impact. For you, Sarah, as you're talking about some of the stories and everything that are shared in the group, I mean, do you know, like, I know people have told you about the impact, but you don't ever really know, right?
No, I still don't know. And, it's funny because we kind of got started at the end of 2019, but during the pandemic mostly. So there's not really any way to know how far you're reaching. And that's okay. Like, because that's not what drives most of us. We're trying to help the person next to us. We're trying to, have these conversations. But then we started going back to conferences. And the thing that I really noticed was all of the people that had never met, but were like sisters to each other. like hugging for the first time, meeting each other in person for the first time because of this forum of storytelling and sharing. They've created these bonds, and just watching that happen kind of before my eyes, and people coming up to me, and us gathering, being able to gather in social events, and just watching that all happen, and to see a little piece of the reach that is coming of that. I feel really lucky, because you're right, most people don't realize that, which is why it's important to tell this story and let people know that it's happening. It is happening. You are making a difference in sharing, and just because you don't see how far like the butterfly effect is spreading, just know that it is.
Yeah, it makes me I flash back to some of those early national conferences when everybody started going back and everything, and you're right, it was, I mean, it was like the first day of school. You've been gone for so long, and then you go back, you're like, oh, it's so good to see you. But yeah, we built that connection virtually and all, and it worked. But it definitely doesn't take place of in person, of course. But virtually, we were making all these connections, and people were sharing stories and learning and learning and learning, and others sharing theirs. Some people who might not have ever shared because they didn't have that connection right away. So especially in public safety, a lot of times, and I say this because I was in it as well early on. There was that stigma that is still kind of there a little bit, which I'm sure we will eventually normalize and all, for sharing stories. But no one wanted to be the person to ask for help. They didn't want to be the one to look weak by asking for help, and I was one of those. I was one of those dispatchers, and I would just bury my calls. But then finally, after kind of learning the hard way, I opened up and started sharing more of my stories, and it actually was therapeutic, and people started to see that more, and really led to a lot of the stuff that I'm doing now. So as you were talking, Sarah, about the past couple of years and how storytelling has helped, and everything with the group and yourself, for me, in dispatch, I started noticing, and one of the things, all of you who are on here, you know this, you end up getting this from friends, family, or just people that you end up meeting. They ask you, what's your worst call, right? Or what's your craziest call? There's always that question. And in the beginning, I'll be honest, I used to get annoyed by that. And I would get annoyed by it, and then I thought, why am I getting annoyed? Like, people are naturally curious, just as you were saying, Sarah. We are curious about each other and other people's stories. So I would go get my hair cut, and someone would say, so what do you do? And I would say, oh God, do I answer? Do I give them the real answer? and then I would say, I'm a 911 dispatcher and supervisor. Oh, that sounds like a crazy job. Yeah, it is. So I ended up taking it, though, as I made it an opportunity to share with the public what it's really like. So early on, 2010, in college, I ended up creating just a little story. I think it was like 3 minutes long or something. And I had a couple of coworkers share their dispatch stories. So it was their worst call, their best call, and why they do what they do. And people really got into it. They were learning more. And I just realized I really had something by sharing these stories, because, again, as humans, we're naturally curious. And by telling people what it is that we go through, what it's really like, they understand. And it's a lot easier, especially during calls as well, that we're able to relate with each other. Oh, there he is.
Okay, just pretend like you don't see him. Okay, that's
Amazing.
okay.
Hi, pal.
You said pretend.
So, one of the other things,
Sorry.
when we're looking at storytelling as well, one of the things I didn't mention right off in the beginning, I'm also the founder of the I Am 911 movement. And we're going to get into a little bit more of some topics here for all of you as well. And it's still the same topic, but I mean different points that we're going to hit on. But with the I Am 911 movement, you know, it started as an effort for the reclassification issue, something that we've been doing for a long time, right? I've been trying to get dispatcher reclassified into the protective class. So with the movement, when it started, you know, one of the things that they were looking for, both organizations, there were stories. So what I wanted to do though was to just raise awareness on this topic through the power of storytelling. And that was just to share a glimpse of just one call that I had taken, just a glimpse, because, you know, we don't get closure. So this is also an example of not getting some of that closure as well. But it was also a way, another form of communication, you know, for me to the person that I spoke to. I'm never going to meet them. However, if they were to see that story, they would know that they were not alone. And it was to prove the difference between emergency dispatchers and commercial dispatchers and clerical workers and such. But it quickly turned into peer support, because what we realized was that yeah, a lot of people have been bearing their stories, and anonymously they were able to get them out. And there were even more connections that were being created that way. So that's just one more way through the I Am 911 movement that, you know, that power of storytelling. I mean, it really gets to some, like, I can tell someone, yeah, I was there, you know, I answered the phone, I talked to this guy about whatever, and then that be it, and someone will move on. Now, if I told them exactly what happened, you know, not exactly, not all the details, but just saying, you know, I took this phone call, the person wasn't breathing well, you know, their wife was screaming in the background, and how I felt. Now that there's power right there, because then people really understand what it is, how hard the job is, how stressful it is, and how the mental health and wellness of dispatchers and call takers are just like, some of it just going down, because a lot of people don't talk about it. But that's why we're doing this now. Sarah, what are some more stuff that you've seen as, you know, you continue to build and grow, because you're over, you know, what, 10,000 strong in your group, correct? And there's so many different forms of, you know, the way you all are sharing your stories as well throughout the group and publicly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm continuing to learn and grow as we go through this as well. And one of the things that I noticed, like through attending your Imagine Listening sessions, Ricardo, especially in person, is it's kind of like a small microcosm of like the industry as a whole. So we're in this room, and you know, Ricardo like tries to make everyone feel comfortable and does the introduction, and always it starts slow. Always people are just a little timid. You know, do I want to share? Do I want to put myself out there? Even though we're in a room that's for that purpose only. And the more people share, the more people want to share, and the more discussion there is, and the more reaction. And it's just, you can break down this shield that you have. We all have kind of this, like, I don't want you to know too much about me, so I don't want you to judge me shield, right? So when we can break that down through telling our own personal stories and being vulnerable, then the good that does for everyone is it allows everyone to be better.
You gotta love it. But you're right though, because, you know, a lot of the times, and I've said it many times, and for those of you who are watching right now, if you've not had a chance to participate in an Imagine Listening session, the next time you get a chance, please do so. It's hard to explain the feeling of being in a room with so many people who come from where you come from, and you're able to speak freely and to share these stories. And and Sarah's correct, when you're in there, it does start out slow. I start out with, does anyone have a story they would like to share? Now, this is, you can share it out loud or you can write it down, and then I'll read it or I save it to put it in the episode later on, because these go out as podcast episodes as well. And people from around the world get to hear these stories. Again, there's no names or nothing like that, but it's the person's voice that's on there that makes it even that much more powerful. And so you're standing there, and once someone shares a story out loud, they build that confidence, and then more share and more share, and it's only for 30 minutes in the first part of that. But sometimes it goes over a little bit because there's so many people who want to share a story and let it out and get it out, and you see people, their emotions are going, but you feel good at the end, because the last 30 minutes is open mic, and that's the lighter side of dispatch, where we talk about all the funny stuff in 911. So we start out emotionally intense, but then we end with the funny part on it, and it's so good because, and Sarah, you've noticed this as well, and I've seen it from your sessions that you do with panels and everything. And I see Roxy there in the chat. She was part of the panel on one of them as well. And you get people talking, and being in that room with all of you, Sarah, and your group back in Ohio at the National NINA conference. That was, I mean, I've got goosebumps on my arms right now, because the stories that all of those powerful women were sharing, and just the energy in there it was intoxicating almost, because it was so good that all of these stories were they were making a difference. And because people were hearing from each other, more wanted to share and give their thoughts on certain things. And it's just a way for us to learn from each other. It's really good.
Yes. And we all have something to put out there in the world and to teach. So one of the things I really noticed since we started the 911 Wonder Woman group is all of the women in that group who are now applying to be speakers at conferences. Like, just realizing through discussion and through listening and learning that, oh, I do have something to say that somebody can learn from. Just realizing that in your own mind is amazing, because we should all feel that way. We're all special. We all have a unique story. But to then, put yourself out there to others in a way that you have never done before helps you grow phenomenally, and also helps the 911 community as a whole. And something you said, Ricardo, was, during our sessions, I invite women that I know to come and be on a panel with us and share their stories. And one of my mentors, Karima Holmes, would tell a story about how she was going through a lot of stress and just broke down and cried. And everyone's like, you cry? Like, you feel stress, and it's like, oh, well, if she can't, then it's okay for me to, like, we hold people up on these pedestals and these platforms, but we're all in the same boat. We all have, different stories and experiences, but, we all have these emotions, and sharing them with each other makes us feel like we're not alone. And that's a huge thing in 911 too, is, we go to work. A lot of us work in small centers and with the same people day in, day out, but you are not alone. And talking with each other and sharing stories with each other is a way that you can feel that connection.
For sure. Now, for everyone who is watching right now, if you have any questions or anything, like, we're watching the chat for any comments or questions or anything, but if you have any, throw them in there for us, and we'll go over them as well. Keely, I see your comment here. Thank you. I appreciate that. If you shared a story, even that, thank you so much, and for the job that you do. And also Roxy, it is very healing when you're in that room and you're speaking to people, sharing these stories, and they understand, they know where you're coming from. So as we're continuing to look at impacting change through storytelling, we want to look at how, telling your story can change how the public sees 911. Now, this is also this is a big thing where, because Roxy's here, I'm gonna call her out on it right now. Her agency's TikTok, that is like killing it right now. That is really cool. So through the power of storytelling and impacting change and such, you can do so through like your own social media presence. So we're going to talk about this a little bit here. And Sarah, and go back to you on to start this out, just as because you've got the private group and all, but you've got all the public presence as well. How has, I guess, telling stories and all through 911 Wonder Women and such, how has that kind of changed the way public sees 911 on that end of it?
Oh, this is so fantastic. So I went when I was in college, it was probably like 2003, 2004. Like Facebook was just getting its start. Only certain people had access to it. And it's like there was MySpace. Now I'm old.
Oh man, MySpace. Yes.
Yeah. Like, what was your song?
Yes.
But anyway, I was taking this class and then there was a speaker in there, and I remember this vividly, him saying that you can only influence the people you can get your arms around. So like his message was get out there and meet people and talk to people, which is great. Like it really affected me. I totally agree. But now we don't have to put our arms around people. We don't have to touch people to share with them and to influence them and to inspire them. I knew nothing about social media when I started the Facebook group, but now I have a public group, a private group, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. And the reason is I kept putting stuff out there and seeing what the response was. So like our public Facebook page is just dedicated to like work with the nonprofit. But on Instagram, I share things about my family and my personal life, along with the nonprofit and 911 stuff. So, it not only helps me, but like, I remember going through the pandemic and both of my little ones were home, 2 and 4 at the time. And you saw this is nothing. Like they would run in, like I would be doing a meeting, they would run in, they would cry. And I would be like, oh my God, like I'm the worst. Everyone hates me. Like this is so hard. But then talking about it, putting it out there, especially on social media, people across the country and the world, I felt like, oh, everyone's going through this. Like it's not just me. And, we have such an opportunity with social media now to use it for good and to share our stories and to bring people together. And it can be such an amazing tool when used the right way. So, I think this whole social media thing has also been very good for 911 because people don't understand. And, now that I'm the executive director of a nonprofit, I find myself more often than not talking to people who don't know much about 911, just trying to spread our message of the nonprofit about women in 911. So going out into the community and talking about it, I get all of this feedback, like I had no idea. Wow, this is awesome. So I'm trying to build upon that now, kind of going out and telling 911 stories also out, beyond folks in 911, and just, it seems to be helping. It's, it'll be a while before we can really tell how much of an impact we're making, but it's important. It's important to everyone tell their story, do their little part, and it adds up to something huge.
So I put a question out to the audience. How do you use storytelling at your agency to change how the public is supposed to be sees 911 on there? Because we want to know. Sarah and I want to know exactly how you are all utilizing this as well, because that's the point of this, right? Impacting change through storytelling, and this is just one of the ways. It's through social media and all. So, for me, in the beginning of Dispatch, the typical public perception of 911 was they're just there answering phone calls, and whatever was in the news was usually bad, right? It's usually bad. And so that was something that early on I wanted to try to change, not the whole world, but at least my local area to what it is that how they see what it is that we do. And because even those out in the road, the field officers, police, fire, and EMS, they didn't know either, unless they would come up to visit. They're just like, oh, you guys are just there. When you tell us to go to another channel, you're probably just telling us to hold because you don't want to answer or something. Like, no, there's a reason I sent you over there, and it's because I'm busy. So there's a lot of different things on there towards changing the public perception of 911. And that was one of the reasons as well that I started the podcast, because as I was saying in the beginning, just going to get my hair cut and people asking different questions, I realized people, they don't know. They don't know what they don't know. So why not put it out there? And I remember in the beginning, and this is a lesson for everyone, just don't let anyone tell you that you can't do things in a way, to a point, because to a point.
Unless it breaks the law, then.
Yeah. Then I didn't do it. Then don't put it on me. It wasn't me. But I remember people early on saying, people are not going to really care about that. They're not going to want to know what dispatch does or what is it that they're doing. I'm like, you serious? Like, I beg to differ. I think people are going to really get into it. And so we started sharing these stories. We started talking about when you call and you're getting put on hold. If you're calling 911, you're getting put on hold. It's not because we're just doing it or we don't want to do our job. That's because your emergency is not the only emergency that's going on. 911 goes and goes and goes. So there was stuff that we were putting out there in the podcast early on, and the officers, the deputies, they ended up sending messages saying, so we learned more from just the first few episodes of this podcast than we've known for like these 20 years that we've been a deputy. We didn't know that you guys were doing this. We didn't know this or that. So it's always good to be able to share those stories so that people fully understand what it is that you're doing. And there's a quote by Simon Sinek that says, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And this can be put towards anything, but especially for your agency, if you're trying to build a social media presence so that you have the public coming back to your page more and more to learn from you, not listening to whoever that's going on and the message is getting destroyed or anything. So there's so many different ways to how to change through storytelling how the public sees 911.
So that sparked something in me too. You saying there's so many different ways, and then we have some folks in the comments talking about some of the things that they do. Shout outs, PSA lip syncs. Like, don't let anyone tell you how to do it. Because it's always been done a certain way doesn't mean that we continue doing things a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I always say, be a disruptor for change. You can throw a wrench in there, like the whole concept of, being a 911 Wonder Woman and being proud, like that hit some people like, oh yeah, I should be. And, thinking outside of the box has really changed 911. I think we see a lot of people coming up now with new ideas and, using social media in new ways to tell stories. I think all of this kind of snowballs into positive change. So, we'll talk a little bit about reclassification, but this all matters. And while the end goal might seem far away, we're closer now than we've ever been. So, continuing to be creative and putting ourselves out there and telling our stories is more important now than ever.
Yeah, I think early on, and I say early on, but I mean like early on in my career, there's people just they didn't talk, and I don't know why that is, that we were not talking. Maybe it's because, and I apologize, but kind of the older guard that was there, because it's a new day. And there's more people who are coming up in the rank who are not looking at it more as just a suck it up, go to the next call. Now it's okay, well, let's take a step back a moment, kind of feel what is going on. Of course, if you have a chance, because I was in a center where there was 3 of us working for the entire county, and we didn't always get a chance to walk off and try to decompress and feel about that. It was more so when I would leave early in the morning and I would drive home for 45 minutes with no radio on and just staring at the road and trying to, collect my thoughts then. But then going back later on and, hopefully, trying to talk with some of my coworkers about it, which it was hard in the beginning. But it ended up working out well because like we've been saying, we realized we were not alone and we just continued on. And so Sarah, as you were talking about the reclassification, that is a good segue actually into the next part. So how can we translate? How is it possible to use storytelling to translate into reclassification at a state or even, like a national level?
So reclassification, this is Sarah's opinion, it's very complex, and it's getting more and more complex as we go, which is good because we're learning more about it. So, there's I like to say several fronts of this reclassification fight that we're in. There is the 911 Saves Act, which we all know that's kind of coming and going. That's a piece of legislation. There's the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. That's the federal body that classifies jobs at a federal level. So that's what happened several years ago when they decided to keep dispatchers at clerical classification. And then there's state and local efforts to be reclassified. So all of these different things should be kind of dissected and looked at as different methods. So I think when we're talking about the state and local reclassification efforts, storytelling is huge because you need to get the media on your side, you need to get legislators on your side, you need to get decision makers, you need to reach people and grab them by the heartstrings and kind of get them on your team, right? Get them in your corner. So that's where I think stories come into play more. There's also at the federal level, they base it a lot on data. So when we're talking about being federally reclassified, we need to look at it kind of from a different perspective. But having this all come together and having this conversation now, I feel like we're doing this more and more, actually talking about it, putting everything on the table, what has worked, what hasn't worked. We have states that are reclassified now. What is your advice? Having those conversations nationally are so important. And I think this coming conference season, that's going to be a huge theme as people talk about what's happening in 911 now, and coming together and coming up with a strategy. So that was a really long-winded answer.
No, that was good. That was good because I'm going to come back to here in just a moment as well about this, because as we're talking about storytelling, it's kind of tricky, right? With the Office of Management and Budget and all, and the stuff that they're actually looking for. Because for all of you who are watching, this is some of the things that we can kind of clear up a little bit here, but maybe have a different discussion another time. But they're looking for hard data, protocols, all these different types of things. But there is a way that you can use that power of storytelling and combine it. If done right, you can combine it with numbers. If you're talking about a bad storm that happened, if you're looking at some of those storms that happened, in Kentucky and other places, those numbers that, and the devastation, a lot of that hard data can be used with the combination of what it was like for you in that room as you were working, or if other people who were dealing with that as well. You combine all of that, and you can send that off or mention that to one of your state reps or something like that. But again, with those numbers and everything, because that's really what they're looking for. They're not looking for the emotional piece. For the I Am 911 movement, when I started it, it was a way to open the door for people to be aware of what it is that you all go through and what it's like, passing on. A lot of other people say that, they've taken this call, but it's haunted them for years. And a lot of those do stay with us. And that's what that portion of it, has been about. But going back to you, Sarah, now, as we're talking about the combinations of stories, but also that hard data, like what are some of the things that people really need to to look for when pushing some of those stories, but also adding the data and everything that OMB is looking for?
Yeah, data can tell a story
Mhm.
if you do it the right way. So using your example, I'll draw on my experience working in a state that is in a hurricane zone. One of the vendors went and took all of the call data, all the calls that came in. They had the technology to illustrate that on like a slide and see like this is the wave of calls and this is how much this center was overwhelmed, and this is what had to happen. I think that's important. People don't understand. So you have to get kind of creative when you're talking about using your data. And they're also looking at policies and procedures and job descriptions. I think a lot of those very basic things in our centers across the country, need to be updated. Like if your job description says administrative and clerical, then when they go and look at your job descriptions, like, oh, look, this is what it says. So, if we can get creative with that data, get creative with our job descriptions and put in there what you actually do. Same thing with training. Even if your center doesn't have required training, telling that story about why that's needed or why that would be helpful, and taking these more hard and fast things that we have, SOPs, directives for our technology, talking about the technology that's being used. Those are stories we can tell as well as the stories of the calls. We can tell the stories of what's going on in our centers and use that information and add that to the emotional appeal. And I think that tells its own story as well.
I agree. I think there are a few people on here who have done this at a state level who would agree as well. Roxy, being one of them, that how that power storytelling can really push for the state, and hopefully, eventually we'll get at the federal level as well. So moving on here, storytelling among your peers. How has this worked out for you, Sarah?
Oh, geez. So it's hard sometimes. I have learned to put myself out there and share stories because it always helps me, even if it's hard, even if, I have to go through some stuff. And, I always recommend therapy because I know there's such a stigma surrounding mental health therapy, but, that's a form of storytelling that is very, very helpful as well. But there's people out there, I'm an observer a lot of times on the stories that are being told surrounding 911 centers and dispatching. And as an observer of those, that sharing of information, I can pluck out things that are needed. So, I've listened for a year about women talk about how they don't have the mentorship that they wish they had, and they wish they had it from someone who wasn't in their center so they could have these difficult conversations. And listening to that and plucking that out, okay, we're building a mentorship platform now. So along with just inspiring the crap out of me with the stories that you all share, I try to share stories from my own personal experience too, because it's hard. I feel alone a lot of the times as well, and I feel a little isolated. So, it's therapeutic. It's therapeutic just to, do with your peers, and it's therapeutic to, find a therapist and have that conversation as well. So I wanted to plug mental health therapy because I don't think enough people do.
You're right. And, we can actually add a few of the points that we have here actually on our notes as we're talking about storytelling among peers and such, because I know we're coming up close to the end here, but I want to make sure that we get through this part at least, because, for me, like I said in the beginning, it was hard to share with a lot of my coworkers. And then when I finally did, others opened up like, oh, I didn't realize you were taking a call like that, or that you had that, or that this happened or that. Let me tell you how I dealt with that. And it's good to be able to open up and talk to those that we work with. Because you talk to your family and you can do so, but unless you have someone who's working in public safety as well, they're not going to understand what you're going through. You get more of that, not so much satisfaction, but I guess comfort and closure when you're talking to those who come from where you come from, or at least someone who understands that public safety side. So also looking at how to change someone else's life or career path through storytelling. So I had added a question on here, and it looks like a few people have answered. I want to go back up here, but the question that I put out was, on a personal level, have you ever used your story to help a coworker or a caller? So I'm just gonna focus on the caller here right now, because there's a lot of things that I feel that we go through, stuff in our past, stuff that we've experienced in life that we can use for some of our callers that call in. So for example, I had a lady call in once. She was suicidal. She didn't want to live anymore. She was dealing with a lot of extreme back and neck pain. And I had help heading out there already. And so I just kept her on the line, and I was talking to her, and there was that power of storytelling. I started telling her one of my stories, because in the past, I had been dealing with some very bad neck and back pain as well. And there were points where I just thought, man, like, this is horrible. Like, I can't take this. I don't know what else to do. I've been going to, physical therapy and doing other things, and it was not working. So the one thing that I ended up doing that I was so afraid to do, just fear of, I guess, being made fun of or so, was I did yoga. Believe it or not, I did yoga. And it took 1.5 hour session of yoga. Just one. All the pain that I was feeling was gone in that one session. Now, I will say it's not going to be like that for everyone, but for me, it was gone, and I just continued to practice. So in that life experience, during that call, I decided to share a story. I shared a little bit of myself with that caller. And by the time I got to the end of that, she said, thank you. EMS had arrived, and she was going to go and talk to them. But she said that she didn't want to kill herself anymore, because there was an option that she never thought about and would not have thought about had we had not spoken that day. So every time I do yoga, I think of that person. I think of that person every time I practice yoga, that, damn it, maybe she is a yoga instructor somewhere. I don't know. But it's just sharing, that part of me that helped that person. And you can do the same thing. You can do the same thing by sharing your stories, whether it be with a caller or with a coworker or family or whichever, because we learn from each other, and we can get that closure. And that also goes for creating positive change to our own mental health, because for me, sharing stories all this time has been therapeutic for me. I've shared stories numerous times from hard calls that I've taken, and it has always helped, because that's the first step, is sharing that story in the beginning, and then
It can be
continuing
scary.
to share. Yes, it
Scary.
can.
It's hard. It's hard, but yes, it gets easier, and you can do it.
Yeah, so I'm glad that people are sharing here as well on how they've done it and have shared their stories. But as for that positive change for our own mental health, Sarah, going back to you were kind of talking about therapy, and how sharing stories can be therapeutic. You guys were doing some live sessions there for a while as well, and I got a chance to see some of those, and it was also therapeutic. Just learning from everyone, and just different ways that you can deal with whatever it is that you're going through. It's powerful.
Yes, they might be doing something that you never thought of. And, I think it's awesome to give people the mic. Like, that's what we were doing with our live sessions, is giving people the mic, saying, here, share. And I see that happening more and more. People are, again, applying to do sessions and doing, with COVID, we had the advent of virtual conferences and more opportunities to be live. And, that's how I learned to speak in front of people, in front of a computer, really. But yeah, it's, we can help give people the mic when we feel like maybe that would help them. If someone's, scared to tell their story, you can encourage them. You need to kind of be on the lookout. I know, Ricardo, with your podcast, I've been kind of going out into the community and saying, hey, you should have a podcast. You should go on with Ricardo. And people are like, well, who, me? And you provide that opportunity for people to have the mic and share. And, we can all do that in our own, not all of us have podcasts, but, we can all do that. We can give people the spotlight. We can give people the mic and encourage them to share their stories. Something that's really powerful as humans is, do you remember that commercial a long time ago when people were like, been there, done that, doing it tomorrow? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
But, to tell someone, oh, I've been there, it's so powerful to be like, hey, I've been there. You're going to be okay. Let's talk through it. That's so healing, I think, for us as people to know we're not alone and we can, open up and be vulnerable.
So all of you who are here right now and watching, like, how are you going to go back and use your story? How are you going to impact someone's life, whether it be yourself, your own life, or coworkers, family members, callers, even those calling in and you sharing your experiences? How, after hearing all of this, how are you going to go back? Because that's always one of the things that I love the most, is hearing after a session that we have done or whatever, how people have taken a lot of that information that they learned and applied it to their own lives or their agency, the coworkers, family, whichever. So, and I mean, you don't have to put that all in the chat or anything, but if you have any, thoughts, that's why we're all here. And that's why we're sharing this, because you might be sitting there watching and thinking, I really don't remember my calls. I'm not really sure, this and that, but they're there. They're definitely there. And I say that because I did a session once in Illinois, and I did Imagine Listening. And there were tons of people in there. There were people sharing and all. And then at the end, someone had come up to me and said, I think there's something wrong with me, because I really didn't feel like I had anything to share or to contribute. Like, I'm listening to these stories and I thought, I really don't have any of those. And I just let this person speak. And by the end of our conversation, which was almost an hour long, they had shared about 3 or 4 hard calls. And at the end, they just sat there and were like, I just told you all of that, and I'm not sure why. And I said, see, I said, you have a story and you shared all of those. Like, we didn't record it or anything. We were just sitting there talking, and it happened. And she was able to share these stories that she thought, I don't have anything to share. So
you're the Oprah of 911. That's why.
Yeah, right. it's that it's that comfort in knowing that someone that you're talking to, I guess, knows where you're coming from, and it just ends up coming out. So all of you who are here watching, you can do the same thing. There's a lot that you can impact with your own story, and just simply sharing, whether it be a good call, bad call, funny call, whichever. There are many different ways that you can impact, and believe it or not, you'll feel better at the end of it as well.
Yes, and it will get easier. I have an example just from yesterday. I was in a boot camp for new nonprofit executive directors. This was very new for me. And I walked in there and, sat down, and there were 30 other people, and they were talking about issues they were having with their staff. And, I have a staff of 10, I have a staff of 20, and, these are what I'm going through. And I just eventually just stood and be like, hi, I'm Sarah. I have no staff. Like, all of this is affecting me. Like, I don't know what to do. And the teacher came up afterwards and he was like, thank you so much for like being vulnerable in that moment. Because then several other people stood up and said, yeah, it's just me too. And, now I have 3 other connections who are in the same boat as me that I can go to. We can bounce ideas off each other. So you just never know.
Yes. And one last story here really quick, just to show the impact of storytelling, but also your stories. A few years ago, I ended up getting a comment on some of the stories that we were being shared on the podcast Facebook page, but the I Am 911 movement photo album where all the stories are shared. And there was a comment on there saying, I don't know who started this, but I just wanted to say thank you. This is a public forum, so I can't say the reason, but just thank you. So I reached out to the person privately, of course, and the person told me that the reason they wanted to say thank you is because they were suicidal, and they had been suicidal for a while, and they just didn't want to live anymore, and somehow stumbled onto the movement and read every single story that had been listed at that time.
Oh, wow.
And by the end of it, they didn't want to commit suicide anymore, because reading those stories changed their mindset. It changed their life, the person said. And it was because they didn't want two things. One, they didn't want their family to have to find them after committing suicide. And two, they didn't want to put the dispatcher through what they were going to go through. So thank you. And the person said, I don't think you know the impact that you've had with these stories, but this is the impact on mine. So that's the power of storytelling, and that's because of what you do on a daily basis. The most vital piece of public safety, those are your stories, and that's what it's doing for people out there that are reading them. Thank you for what you guys do.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, guys, I know it's almost 11 o'clock. We're approaching that 1 hour mark, but I wanted to say thank you from Virtual Academy for joining us today. This has been great. Sarah, Ricardo, it's always a pleasure to have you guys join us and to be part of anything that you guys are doing, because you're amazing and
Thank
you're
you
a
so much.
friend.
Thank you.
And like we said, we're going to be sharing this with, several of our partners, as well as, just the 911 community, because we want to get the word out there, and everything that you're doing about storytelling and talking about the importance of that. We want everybody to be able to have access to as many resources as they possibly can, because that's why we do this, is to help people. So, but thank you so much. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We've had great conversation going on in the chat today. That's very exciting. And if anything that we can answer any questions for you, please let us know. And hey, everybody have a great day and a great week and a blessed year.
Yes.
You as
Happy
well.
New Year,
Thank you all.
everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.